So June 9th, 2026, the United States Central Command, CENTCOM, posts a short statement on social media. They say American forces have completed what they call self-defense strikes on nearly 20 military targets inside southern Iran. The reason they say is this: a U.S. Army Apache helicopter was lost after a mid-air collision with an Iranian Shahed drone over the Strait of Hormuz. CNN calls it a proportional response. Fox News calls it a moment of American strength. Social media divides into two camps, as it always does. One side blaming Trump for escalating a war, the other side praising him for protecting American troops. And every single one of them is looking at the wrong thing. Now, I want to show you why, and I want you to do something for me. I want you to forget, just for the next 20 minutes, everything you've heard from the major networks about this event, okay? I want you to go back to the actual CENTCOM statement. Not a summary, not a highlight, the original words. And when you read those original words, you will notice something very strange. CENTCOM says this strike was a response to the downing of the Apache helicopter. Yes. But then, and this is the part everybody missed, they add one more sentence. They say the operation was also, and I'm quoting here, a response to attacks on U.S. forces and international commercial ships transiting regional waters. Wait. The helicopter went down on June 8th. But they're referencing attacks on commercial shipping? Those have been going on for weeks, months. Why would you put that in a statement about a helicopter? Unless the helicopter wasn't really the point. And then look at the target list. Qushm Island, Bandar Abbas, Surik, Jask, Goruk. Every single location sits along the southern coast of Iran. Every single location faces out onto the Strait of Hormuz. And what do they actually hit at these locations? Air defense systems, ground control stations, coastal surveillance radar networks, not drone launch pads, not the sites that produced the Shahed that hit the Apache, not weapons depots, not nuclear facilities, radar, just radar. Now let me ask you a very simple question. If someone punches you in the face and you want revenge, where do you hit them back? You hit them in the face, right? Or maybe the body. You don't hit them in the eyes. But that's exactly what America did on June 9th. They didn't hit Iran's fist, they hit Iran's eyes. And I want to spend the next 20 minutes showing you exactly why. Because this is not a story about a helicopter. This is a story about the most strategically important stretch of water on the planet, who controls it, and a battle over the future of the entire Middle East that most people are still not seeing clearly. And here's the thing that makes this even more interesting. Iran saw it coming. They knew exactly what America was really after. That's why just a few hours later, in the early morning of June 10th, they fired ballistic missiles and drones at 21 American and allied military targets across the region simultaneously in 3 different countries: Jordan, Kuwait, Bahrain. But then the question you have to ask yourself is, why would a country under economic blockade, a country that just had its military sites bombed, dare to retaliate on that scale? And the answer, I want you to hold on to this, is not in Tehran, it's in Pyongyang. It's in a state visit that happened the day before all of this, that almost no major news outlet connected to the exchange of fire in the Gulf. Okay? Let's break this down properly. The first thing I want you to understand is what I'm going to call the Hormuz Eye Network. Now, most people know the basics about the Strait of Hormuz. It's narrow, about 33 kilometers at its narrowest point. People can swim across it. But through that 33-kilometer gap, approximately 20% of the world's entire crude oil supply passes every single day. Japan depends on this region for 75% of its oil imports. China, 40%. India, 60%. The Japanese Prime Minister said publicly, if the strait closes, Japan's economy collapses within 8 to 9 months. So it's important. We know that. But here's what most people don't fully appreciate. In the months leading up to June 9th, Iran had been constructing and expanding a system that gave them something extraordinary. Not just the ability to threaten the strait, but the ability to see everything. Every ship, every tanker, every military vessel, in real time. This system, the radar networks, the coastal surveillance stations, the ground control centers, the integrated air defense spread across the islands and coastline facing the Hormuz, I'm calling it the Hormuz Eye Network. And it gave Iran 3 very specific capabilities. First, they could identify and track every vessel transiting the strait by the hour, by the minute. Second, They could coordinate their fast boats and drone squadrons from the Islamic Revolutionary Guard Corps, the IRGC, to intercept, shadow, or board any of those vessels they chose. And third, and this is the one that matters most economically, they could collect what were essentially protection fees. Sources suggest Iran had been extracting anywhere from 1.5 to 2 million US dollars per voyage from commercial ships wanting safe passage, paid in cargo, sometimes in cryptocurrency. Now think about what that means. This is a country under severe economic sanctions, under American oil blockade, and they built a toll booth at the most important intersection in the global energy system. That's not just money, that's survival infrastructure. But more important than the money, and this is a key insight, this system was Tehran's single most powerful bargaining chip at the negotiating table. Because the peace talks that were happening at that exact moment had a central sticking point. America was demanding unconditional freedom of navigation through Hormuz. Iran was demanding the right to manage and charge for passage. Iranian state media had literally declared this their trump card. They were confident that as long as they physically controlled the strait, Washington couldn't force them into any deal they didn't want. Okay? Now look at that target list one more time. Kish, Bandar Abbas, Surik, Jask, Goruk, coastal radar, surveillance networks, ground control stations. America wasn't hitting back for a helicopter. America was trying to blind Iran, because when Iran is blind, Iran loses control of the strait. When Iran loses control of the strait, Iran loses its most powerful negotiating asset. When Iran loses that negotiating asset, Washington can dictate the terms of the ceasefire. This was not a self-defense operation. This was a strategic decapitation of Iran's maritime dominance. And the Apache helicopter, those two pilots who, by the way, were rescued safely within 2 hours by an unmanned surface vessel, was the legal and political justification that allowed them to do it. Let that sit for a moment. Now here's where it gets more interesting. Because a lot of you are probably thinking, okay, fine, maybe America had a strategic motive. But Iran, a country that's been under blockade for months, that's been absorbing American airstrikes for over 100 days, why on earth would they respond with 21 simultaneous attacks on American and allied bases? That's not a response. That's an escalation. What gave them that confidence? And for this, I need you to look away from the Gulf completely. I need you to look at East Asia, June 8th, 2026. One day before the Apache went down, one day before everything escalated. Chinese President Xi Jinping lands in Pyongyang, North Korea. Kim Jong-un meets him personally on the main square with a massive ceremony. Thousands of people, military music, the full state welcome treatment. And in the talks that took place that same day, the two sides discussed, and this is the official language, deepening cooperation in the fields of diplomacy, law enforcement, and military affairs. Now, every major news network treated this as a separate story, a routine diplomatic visit, something to mention briefly and move on from. That was a serious mistake, because what you're looking at when you connect these two events is the crink axis. China, Russia, Iran, North Korea, not just an informal alignment, a coordinated multi-front architecture designed to stretch American attention, American resources, and American credibility simultaneously across different theaters of conflict. Western analysts had already been warning about this in their latest reports. They described the crink bloc as a synchronized threat to American leadership, democratic institutions, and global supply chain security. And Xi's arrival in Pyongyang on June 8th was not coincidental timing. It was a message not primarily to Kim Jong-un, but to Tehran. The message was this: you are not alone. Do what you need to do. And the support behind that message is real and specific. China has been accused of supplying Iran with manpads, man-portable air defense systems, weapons that may have been used in aerial engagements in the region. China allegedly provided Iran with X-band radar components and missile fuel precursor chemicals. And critically, Iran is reported to have quietly purchased a high-resolution Chinese reconnaissance satellite, which they used to identify and track American military assets at exactly the bases they then attacked on the morning of June 10th. Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan. Think about what that means. Iran didn't just fire missiles at random targets. They fired at targets their Chinese satellite had been watching. They knew the layout. They knew the locations. The IRGC later claimed they hit 70% of their intended targets based on satellite imagery and field intelligence reports. That's not the behavior of a desperate country firing blindly in the dark. That's a country with allies who have given them eyes in space. And at the United Nations, Russia and China have been vetoing every resolution that America and the Gulf states tried to pass, resolutions to condemn Iran's maritime aggression, resolutions to establish a protective naval force at the Strait of Hormuz, resolutions to implement new sanctions through the Security Council, all blocked. Even on June 9th, during an emergency Security Council meeting, China and Russia continued to obstruct the Sanctions Committee process against Iran, arguing the entire snapback mechanism was legally invalid. So here's the full picture. Iran's leadership knew they had Beijing and Moscow standing behind them at the United Nations, providing them diplomatic cover. They knew they had Chinese satellite intelligence helping them target American bases. They knew Xi Jinping had just publicly embraced Kim Jong-un, sending a visible signal of bloc solidarity 24 hours before the American strikes began. That is why a country under economic blockade dared to retaliate against 21 American and allied targets simultaneously. It's not recklessness, it's calculated confidence. Okay, does that make sense? Now I want to bring in a framework that I think helps explain the deeper pattern of what we're seeing. Because what happened on June 9th and 10th is not just a military event. It is, in a very real sense, the collapse of a theory about how the world is supposed to work. That theory is called institutional balancing. The core argument is this: in a world where direct war between major powers is too costly because of nuclear weapons, because of economic interdependence, because of the sheer destruction involved, countries don't fight each other directly. Instead, they use international institutions. They use the United Nations, international law, multilateral organizations, sanction mechanisms. They trap each other through rules rather than bullets. And for months before June 9th, this is exactly what was being attempted. America and its European allies activated the snapback mechanism under Security Council Resolution 2231, designed to reimpose international sanctions on Iran's nuclear program and legally isolate Tehran. Bahrain and the Gulf Cooperation Council states pushed for resolutions to condemn Iran's maritime attacks and establish international protection for ships in the Strait. All of these were attempts to contain Iran, not through military force, but through the architecture of international law. And every single attempt was blocked. China and Russia used their veto power to kill every resolution. They argued the snapback mechanism was legally void. They argued the UN no longer had jurisdiction over Iran's nuclear file. They created what I'm going to call a supervision vacuum, a legal gray zone where Iran could operate without consequence. And when the institutional tools fail completely, when the referees have been bribed and the rulebook has been shredded, you pick up a gun. That's June 9th. That's what you're actually watching. Not a reckless escalation, not a breakdown in diplomacy. The institutional balancing architecture had already been collapsing for months, one veto at a time. June 9th was just the moment the collapse became visible, announced in the sound of airstrikes. But here's the part that doesn't fit neatly, and I think this is actually the most important detail in this whole story. Despite all the airstrikes, despite all the missiles and drones and threats, both sides were still talking. Trump told the Wall Street Journal that a deal could come in 2 or 3 days. A senior White House official told Politico, nothing changes where the deal stands right now. It is still close. So you have this bizarre situation where two countries are firing at each other and simultaneously assuring the world that negotiations are ongoing. What does that tell you? It tells you both sides know they cannot actually win this through force. They are using military action not to defeat each other, but to reshape the negotiating table. They're firing bullets to move the goalposts. The strikes are diplomatic instruments delivered by aircraft instead of diplomats. I call this warfare by gunfire diplomacy. And it is much, much more dangerous than a real war because neither side has a clear definition of when it stops. Okay? I want to talk about a group of countries that nobody is talking about enough in this story. And this is the second blind spot of this entire week. Bahrain, Kuwait, Jordan, UAE, Saudi Arabia. These countries are not at war. They declared neutrality for years. Dubai was marketed as the Singapore of the Middle East. No taxes, the world's busiest airport, safety and stability that attracted the wealth of half the planet. At the peak of the crisis when this war first began, wealthy residents in Dubai were willing to pay $250,000 just to get on a plane and leave. But in Iran's retaliatory strike on June 10th, the IRGC targeted American bases in Bahrain, Kuwait, and Jordan. Why? Because these countries host American military installations. Because their airspace was used, either by American or Israeli aircraft in operations against Iran. They let it happen. In Iran's strategic logic that makes them participants, Iran had warned them explicitly. The Iranian Foreign Ministry issued a statement saying Gulf neighbors bear, and I'm quoting, legal and moral responsibility to prevent the United States and Israel from using their territories, airspace, or facilities to plan or support attacks against Iran. They told these countries, if you allow this to happen, you have no right to complain about what comes next. And what came next was ballistic missiles aimed at their territory. There is a concept in international relations theory called alliance entrapment. The idea is this: small states give up a portion of their sovereignty to a powerful patron in exchange for security protection. But the tragic irony is that by hosting the patron's military bases, they become targets in conflicts they never chose to join. They're pulled into a war that serves the patron's interests, not their own. That is the situation of the Gulf states right now. And the economic consequences are genuinely catastrophic in ways that aren't being discussed. The GCC countries import 80% of their food from overseas. They produce almost none of their own fresh water. 60% of their water supply comes from desalination plants. These plants require enormous amounts of electricity, imported equipment, and uninterrupted supply chains. And here's a fact that should terrify every economist following this story. A $50,000 Iranian Shahed drone can destroy a desalination plant worth hundreds of millions of dollars. The Gulf states are not just economic casualties, they are hostages, and the international community is barely even noticing. Alright, now I want to say something out loud that a lot of people don't want to admit, because it changes the whole picture. The American airstrikes on June 9th did not cause significant damage to Iran's military capacity. I know that sounds strange. It sounds wrong. So let me show you the evidence. The spokesperson for Iran's National Security and Foreign Policy Committee stated on June 9th, the same day the strikes happened, that Iranian armed forces were at maximum readiness and that, and this is his exact phrasing, the damages have been repaired. State media in Iran acknowledged explosions on Qushm Island and in Bandar Abbas, but they reported no major infrastructure losses, no strategic facilities destroyed, no command and control centers taken offline. 2 Iranian air defense soldiers died during that period, but they were killed by an Israeli airstrike the previous day, not by the American operation. And here's the most revealing piece of evidence of all. The morning after the American strikes, just hours later, Iran launched a coordinated ballistic missile and drone assault on 21 American and allied targets simultaneously across 3 countries. If the American strikes had actually destroyed Iran's command infrastructure, if they had genuinely degraded Iran's military capability, that response would have been impossible. So what did the American strikes actually accomplish? A US official told CNN directly, this was a warning shot, not a destruction campaign, not a strategic defeat of Iranian military power, a warning shot, designed to signal displeasure, to punish symbolically, but calibrated specifically to avoid breaking the ongoing peace talks. Trump himself told the Wall Street Journal before ordering the strikes that the helicopter crash was, his words, not a big deal because the pilots were safe. He was then persuaded to change course by Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth and Joint Chiefs Chairman Dan Kane, who argued that regardless of whether the collision was intentional, the incident warranted a response. So Trump went from not a big deal to ordering strikes on 20 targets in a matter of hours. Now ask yourself, if you are Iran's leadership, what do you learn from this? You learn that America's response was limited, cautious, restrained. You learn they hit radar installations, not your nuclear program, not your missile stockpiles, not anything that would genuinely cripple you. You learn they described it publicly as a warning shot. You learn they told CNN immediately that they expected negotiations to continue. Iran expert Danny Citrinovitz, former director of the Iran branch of Israeli military intelligence, put it clearly. He said Iran emerged from this latest exchange of strikes with the belief that, and I'm going to quote him directly, they can absorb pressure and are ready to respond to attacks. That is exactly the opposite of deterrence. You wanted Iran to be afraid. Instead, Iran is confident. And that confidence is the most dangerous outcome of June 9th and 10th. Not the missiles, not the burning radar stations, the confidence. Now, I want to be fair here. I always want to be fair. So let me make the strongest possible case for the American position, because I never want you to just sit here and nod along with everything I say. I want you to think for yourself. The argument for the American side goes like this. A U.S. military helicopter was lost. Regardless of whether the collision with the Iranian drone was accidental or intentional, failing to respond sends a message of weakness to Iran and to every American ally in the region. If America absorbs this without reaction, Iran concludes it can challenge U.S. military presence without consequences. That creates a template for escalation. The targets selected, air defense systems, radar networks, coastal surveillance, were the exact tools Iran used for months to threaten international shipping. Destroying them was legitimate self-defense or freedom of navigation. This is a reasonable, measured response. That argument makes sense. It has historical precedent. It has internal logic. But here is what that argument cannot explain. Trump himself, before the strikes, before he was talked into ordering them, said the helicopter crash was not a big deal. His first instinct was to downplay it, precisely because the pilots were rescued safely. He then had to be persuaded by his defense secretary and his top general that it warranted a response. So the question becomes, if this was a genuine, necessary self-defense operation, why did the president initially not think it was a big deal? And if it was a pre-planned strategic objective, destroy Iran's maritime surveillance capacity to weaken their negotiating position, why would you wait for a helicopter accident to do it? Unless the helicopter accident was not the trigger. Unless the helicopter accident was the opportunity. And there's one more thing the American argument cannot explain, no matter how you frame it. If you are retaliating for a drone that hit your helicopter, you hit the drone launch infrastructure. You hit the bases where those drones are assembled, stored, launched. That is the proportional response to a drone attack. You do not hit radar stations. You hit radar stations when your goal is not revenge. Your goal is blindness. You want Iran to lose its ability to see the strait, to monitor shipping, to coordinate interception. You hit the eyes. And that is exactly what CENTCOM did. America did not hit back for the Apache. America used the Apache to justify hitting exactly what it had wanted to hit for months. Okay? Let me bring everything together now, and then I'll give you 3 specific things to watch in the next 48 to 72 hours. Here is what the events of June 9th and 10th are actually telling us. America used the Apache collision as legal and political cover to execute a strategic operation it had been planning for some time. The destruction of Iran's Hormuz Eye network, the coastal radar and surveillance infrastructure that gave Iran real-time control over the world's most important maritime choke point. Without that infrastructure, Iran loses its ability to enforce payment on commercial shipping. Without that payment system, Iran loses critical economic lifelines under American blockade. And without the physical ability to close the strait, Iran loses its most powerful bargaining chip at the negotiating table. That was the operation. Iran read the operation correctly. They identified the strategic intention behind the target selection immediately. Their foreign ministry publicly stated that the destroyed facilities existed to, quote, protect the country's border security and ensure maritime safety on international waterways. That's diplomatic language for, we know you were trying to take away our eyes and we know why. And Iran responded the way they did 21 targets, 3 countries, simultaneous, because they had the strategic backing to do so. Because Xi Jinping was in Pyongyang on June 8th, cementing Krink Axis solidarity in front of the world's cameras. Because Russia and China were blocking every Western move at the UN Security Council in real time. Because Iranian military intelligence had Chinese satellite imagery of every American base they targeted. Iran fired with precision and confidence because they knew they were not alone. Meanwhile, American strikes caused minimal physical damage. Iran's military capacity was not degraded in any meaningful way. Iran emerged from the exchange more confident, not less. The Gulf states are now experiencing the very consequences their decision to host American bases made inevitable. And the international institutional framework, the UN, the sanctions architecture, the legal machinery that was supposed to prevent all of this has collapsed under the weight of CIRAC vetoes. And yet, both sides are still talking. The peace deal is still described as close, which means all of this, the strikes, the missiles, the burning radar towers, the F-35 hangars in Jordan, all of it is theater designed to negotiate. The question is, at what cost? And for how much longer? Here are 3 things I want you to watch very closely in the next 48 to 72 hours. First, has Iran actually restored its Hormuz Eye network? Their spokesman claimed the damages were repaired the same day. If that's true, if the radar networks are back online and Iran can once again track every vessel in the strait, then America failed completely in its primary strategic objective. Watch the shipping data. Watch whether commercial tankers start reporting harassment or interception again. That will tell you everything about whether the American operation actually worked. Second, watch Saudi Arabia. Riyadh is trapped between 2 impossible pressures. Iran is threatening any country that hosts American forces. America is expecting Saudi cooperation in maintaining the naval blockade. If Saudi Arabia starts refusing U.S. aircraft access to its airspace, or if Riyadh begins making direct diplomatic outreach to Tehran without coordinating with Washington, that means the American alliance network in the Gulf is fracturing. And a fracturing alliance network in the Gulf is not just a regional problem. It is the beginning of the end of the petrodollar system that underpins the entire American financial empire. Third, watch Trump's language about the deal. Right now, he is using the word close. He is saying negotiations are ongoing. He told Politico nothing has changed. If you hear him stop saying close, if the language shifts from deal to pressure, from talks to maximum force, that is the signal that diplomacy has collapsed and we are entering a genuinely new and more dangerous phase of this war. Not the phase we're in now where strikes are diplomatic messages. The phase where strikes are the actual strategy. And here is your homework. I want you to go find the original CENTCOM statement from June 9th, not a news summary, the actual statement, and find the sentence that mentions international commercial ships. Ask yourself this simple question. Why is a self-defense response to a helicopter crash described in language that also covers commercial maritime attacks that happened weeks or months before? There's only one answer that makes sense. And the final question I want to leave you with. I've been thinking about this all week, and I don't think anyone is asking it quite the right way. If America just destroyed Iran's Hormuz Eye network, the radar systems, the surveillance infrastructure, everything that gave Tehran visibility over the strait, and if Iran was still able to launch a coordinated missile attack on 21 targets within hours, then what is actually controlling the Strait of Hormuz? Is it radar? Is it satellites? Is it military hardware? Or is it the will of people who have decided for whatever reason that they will never stop fighting? Because if it's the second one, if it's will, not equipment, then no airstrike in the world changes the strategic equation. You can blow up every radar tower on the Iranian coast and the strait stays contested because the humans behind the radar are still there and they're not afraid. Think about that. All right. I'll see you all in the next class.